Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Making Your Mark podcast. I'm your host, Mark Bundang, and today, like I always do, I have a very special guest. This one is Stella Filippatos. Hi, Stella.
Hi, Mark.
Thank you very much for being on the podcast. I definitely appreciate it, and I think the audience is going to too, because I know you have a lot to offer in terms of life experience and wisdom, and we're going to get a glimpse of that today. So, just a little bit about how I know Stella. Stella is someone that I came across back in our MBA days. I remember this one class that we had with Jordan Lavelle for experience marketing, and that's kind of where I first had a glimpse of the star that is Stella. And there's two things that stood out with me for you, Stella. One is this woman is super smart. And the second thing is she puts in the work, so I don't know if that's accurate or if you would describe yourself that way, but I certainly saw it. And then I kind of followed you on social media. And when I decided to start the podcast, Stella is one of the first people actually that I thought of reaching out to. So thank you again, Stella. I wanted to ask, like I ask everyone that guests on our podcast, what's your background? Like, where do you feel that you've made your mark?
Well, first of all, pleasure to be here, Mark. Lovely to see you again today. Where did I make my mark? Well, maybe I'll start a little bit with some background about myself. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I've done a research master's in microwave engineering, and shortly thereafter, you're right, I did an MBA with a specialization in marketing. So definitely a person with varied interests. And a little bit due to maybe the space technologies background and also the heavy industry here in Montreal around aviation, I have been working in aviation for the last 18 or so years. So mainly in that one single industry, but in varied projects, right, across many different fields. Be it first as an engineer doing development work or software work, be it doing bids and proposals, or leading program teams, leading engineering teams, or leading business transformation projects. So a varied, I would say, background, but in the industry of aviation and aerospace.
And one of the words or terms that you use is business transformation. So as you know, I don't know if my social media postings have ever spoken about it. Or I'm being a bit modest myself. I posted a lot about business transformation, and I know it's different things to different people. But it's one of the things that I was also very fascinated about with you, because everyone has their own take. I've had another guest who also kind of did that. He talked about business transformation. It was completely different from what I was ever used to. I was used to implementations of ERP systems. He was talking about how banks, when they have acquisitions and then they try to integrate the two. So very interesting that you're talking about business transformation and other things within the aviation industry. So I know how experienced and accomplished you are. I wanted to ask you then, like all of our guests, we have them kind of talk to some pivotal moments or some experiences that they want to share. Do you have a first one in mind that you'd like to share with the audience, Stella?
Yeah, definitely. One of the first things that I noticed was really in terms of ambition, right? I was able to do back in 2020 during the height of COVID. I was able to do a training that my work provided to me called l'EFEA here in French in Montreal, but it's also there's an English version of the program called the A Effect, where A stands for ambition, you know. And one of the things, I mean, we've known each other a long time. You know that I was a person that was very driven in my studies, driven in my work. I think I would characterize myself somewhat as ambitious, maybe not the most ambitious person, but definitely one of the aspects of my work. And that program made me realize that I had never, ever explicitly spoken about it to any of my leadership, to any people around my work sphere or my network. And I think we minimize how important it is to actually share our experiences, whether with our immediate supervisors, our departments, our industry. I feel like people think of us a lot more than they do. Everyone is so focused and concentrated on the million and one things they got to get done in a day. If you're not explicit about what you want to do, what are your next steps, what do you want to learn about, I feel like that kind of gets lost. And this program enabled me to realize that I had never ever spoken about any of the next steps I wanted to take at work. I just assumed people knew by how hard I was working. An example, if you'll allow me, Mark, here in Quebec, because I don't know if it's purely nationwide, but here in Quebec, when you have a baby, I think you're allowed up to, I think it's 48 or 50 weeks of maternity leave.
Mm.
And there's a minimum that the mother has to take in those weeks. I think it's 24. Anyways, I'm forgetting because it's been a while now. But I took the bare minimum and my husband took the remainder. And in my mind, well, it was clear, like I was ready to come back to work. I was ready to go on to a next step at work. I read almost all my emails while I was on my first mat leave. Don't recommend anyone doing that, by the way. And something that I noticed is that, on the contrary, if you're not outspoken about that, whether you've been gone 4 months or a year and a half, people don't even notice. Everyone's busy with their own day to day, and that's something that I learned later on in my career, 4 or 5 years ago, that you really have to state things. And probably 5 months before going on that mat leave, I should have said, listen, when I come back, my husband's going to be at home with the kid for 5 months. It's going to be a great time for me to transition into something new. You can't wait for people to read your mind or to guess what you're thinking, is my point here.
I have an interesting question for you then. When I was growing up, I kind of followed the philosophy of let the work speak for itself. And I think it's kind of related to what you're saying. If I just work hard enough, people will notice, you know? And I also know that's not completely true. Some people will recognize it, but in your mind, like or your opinion, like what is the balance between letting the work speak for itself, if you're a humble person as well, versus advertising I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. What's the balance between that?
I struggle with this as well. I really struggle with this. I like to say what the team has been achieving, what we've been doing. If you see my LinkedIn profiles, I'm often talking about my latest project and my team. I haven't found the perfect recipe, to be honest with you, but I know it can be done better than what I have been up to.
Mm.
And I think it can be done also in a humble way, like by choosing your moments when to speak up about your achievements and about yourself. I think the error many of us make is that whole, I think, oh, because I'm working so hard, people will notice. I think sometimes you really have to be more verbal about it and choose the right times to do so. It wouldn't even be, it would sound a little forced if every time I walked into a meeting I was talking positively about what I've accomplished. Like, I think some people do it far more naturally than I do, but I think choosing the right moments to highlight your achievements and get the most out of that. But I don't think staying in a corner and hoping that the work will speak for itself is the right way to go. For example, there's years in my career where I would have worked 60, 80-hour weeks, not going to networking events, not meeting up with the executive leadership of my program or my team. When staying behind a laptop and doing tons of work is great, but if no one ever hears about it, if it
Mm.
doesn't ever get highlighted, right? And I think at some point people start questioning your judgment as well when you do that. Like, they're probably thinking, okay, you met a lot of KPIs, but if no one hears about it or no one even attributes them to you, because if you're not there to speak of them, how would they know who met those KPIs for the department? Definitely not the way to go about it. I mean, yes, a lot of learning and a lot of experience in those crazy work intensive weeks and months and years, but not a lot to show in terms of progression or recognition, I would say. If you're not there to speak on your behalf, and your boss is not inclined to do so necessarily, if you haven't even spoken to your boss about all you've accomplished, then who will?
Yeah, I got to pull on this string a little bit because it's something that I struggled with. I only learned it when I was in my late 30s, So that's some time ago, but not that long ago. I think what I wanted to ask you then is it's in the how, right? It's in the how of how you ask or how you tell people what you accomplished. Something for me that I've only learned recently is who do you tell? In what setting? Formal, informal? Do you have any kind of guidelines that you use?
I haven't developed a secret sauce or a secret recipe, but I think if you have punctual, whether they're weeklies or monthlies with your direct supervisor, as you're updating them on the project and and the way things are going or how you're meeting your schedule, the financials, I think that's a nice place to kind of insert some wins that you've had personally and that the team has had. Probably at a higher level meeting, choose your moments as well. I don't know that there's a perfect recipe for everyone, Mark, to be very honest with you. I just know that you have to be conscious about it, and you have to get out of your shell and do it. Maybe it's different in different settings, different industries, how things are done, or maybe the forums are more public when people speak of their accomplishments. I know that that can be different depending on how you present, how you present, and how you're asked to give your deliverable progression. But the real reminder is to actually find a way to do it. I don't think it'll be the same for everyone or every industry.
Okay, it depends on context. It depends on the setting.
The career
Um,
level as well, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, I've had the fortune of working in large corporations, but also small. And the settings are different, right? Depending on the culture and the hierarchy. Some small businesses are very flat, and
Mm-hmm.
you can have conversations informally with many different people who are in management or in other positions. Whereas in a large top-down hierarchy, there's a way, like sometimes you do, uh, at least in my case, you spoke to it a bit, like there's the traditional, like go to your managers, say what you need to say. And then I think one thing that I learned too was that in when you're presenting as a group, right, or not as a group, if you're presenting like something to a group or a group of executives or anything like that, I find you can say what you've accomplished and still say we did this. If you say that, because a team, good things can happen from individuals, but great things happen with teams, right? So I think if you say we were able to do this, and you can still by proxy say that you've accomplished something, and
Mm-hmm.
this is where you'd like to go, or with the, but it's not violating your humility value.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Absolutely. Okay. Good. Good. I wanted to ask you if I think, and for the benefit of the audience of this podcast, we guests and I usually prepare. This is not always like uh, magic, right? So we have some things we talk about ahead of time. Did you want to speak a little bit about networking?
Yes, definitely. I think it's extremely important in everyone's career to build a substantial network. It could be within your function, within the industry, maybe both. Keeping your network alive with the people you went to university with or did an MBA with, like ourselves, for example. It's increasingly important. But another aspect of it that I find extremely, extremely important, rather than just keeping the network active, is also being very conscious of your professional brand and your reputation. One thing that I've always valued, no matter in what role I've moved on to or what company I've moved on to, or sometimes have returned to, is, on what terms are you leaving the role, the position, the boss, the company, right? The world is huge, but it is also increasingly small. Okay. And people I've come across as colleagues in other companies are now the CEOs of my suppliers in Europe, can one day hire me for a contract when I'm in semi retirement to do some consulting work. I think the longer you're in an industry as well, you come across people many times. I don't know if you would agree with that, but for myself, I mean, I keep on seeing it over and over and over again when people mention someone to me, like, oh, I was at a conference and I saw, I'm going to make up the name, I saw Joe, and it turns out Joe was a colleague of mine 10 years ago, or was on my team 10 years ago, or I went to school with Joe. In increasingly varied as well industries or contexts, not exactly in what I used to know Joe for, if you will, right? So you carry that with you. And I often say, and this is probably more in terms of something else I wanted to mention about your boss and things like that, your direct supervisor, but increasingly, right, a lot of people are going to speak about you if they know you, not behind your back, but behind closed doors in other settings, right? What reputation have you left, or what is your personal brand? And when they go to this cool conference in Toronto about the future of AI, and they're like, hey, remember Mark? We went to school with Mark. How's Mark doing? What are they going to say about you? And who's going to think of you as a result of that for maybe some great future opportunity project? It's kind of like I don't know how to say that, like an imprint, or like you know how you leave your mark, I guess, if you allow me the pun, you know
I'll take
what
it.
what kind of mark are you leaving on your industry, on the people you have touched in your industry, on your colleagues? And I think that's very important. I mean, opportunities come through other people, right? Like, who's going to think of you if it's not through other people? And how you've touched those people across your career and your path is meaningful. So I always try to be, and I mean, it's in my nature too. I always try to, I'm professional. I can be tough in negotiations. I can be tough in certain business contexts, but I'm always fair, and I always try to maintain my relationships positive in the professional realm.
So I have a question for you, actually. If
Sure.
you had a couple of guiding values that describe your reputation, what would it be?
I would say I'm tough but fair, and that transpires in a lot of things. And in the way people feel about me many years after we've worked together. For instance, a lot of my former bosses or supervisors, or even former team members, if positions open up that are for my former bosses, if it's a peer position, they'll often tell me, you want to come and work with me in this department. I always think that's a nice sign of, I
Hmm.
appreciated working with you, and now I would like to work with you at the same level, if you will. Or just last week, a former team member of mine said, my boss is leaving. You want to come? Which I find one of the highest forms of compliment. And he was laughing about it because he knew it was not going to be a position that interested me, but he still mentioned it, which, as I said, I find is a high form of compliment. Another thing I would say is I'm always very, and I don't know how to say that exactly, but I always keep things very civil, cordial, professional, right? I think that's one of my brands. I've been in many situations, many meetings where a lot of people have very high emotion, and maybe some of that is calculated, maybe not. I try to do that less and less in my own career. I can't remember the last time I was really really feeling that emotion in a negative way. And ultimately, it's impossible for everyone to say that they had only positive interactions with you. That would not be true, right? And the people that were not coming to work with the intent to be very productive, advance the project in a good way, or that were not really committed to it, I'm not sure all of them would say that they had positive interactions with me on my teams. But anyone that 90% of the time, anyone that was there, that wanted to contribute, that wanted us to all work collectively towards something, would say that they sense that toughness but fairness, and all around collaborative, nonetheless, I would say.
Okay, good. Collaborative and tough but fair. Interesting. You don't use softer adjectives like say kind, being kind, or something like that. Um, but but
it's
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
it's yeah, I mean, it's a tough industry, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the humane aspect is different for me. Are you going to get a birthday card or a holiday card? Yes. Am I going to think of you in terms of that? When we reach a milestone, is everyone on the team going to get some small token from me? Yes. Um, I wouldn't attribute it, however, to professional kindness, if you will. That's just humanity to me, right? Like if someone on the team has an unfortunate experience, a family member passing away or something, I will make sure that we as many of us as possible can go and pay our respects. But that to me is just being human, right? It's not really about being kind in a professional setting. That's just the most basic logical form of interaction with people you see day in, day out, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so this is just a basic for you.
Yeah.
It's understood. Okay, it's I what I like about what you just said is I like the clear authenticity that you have with the fair but tough, or tough but fair, and then they'll think about you because nice gets people to like you, but tough but fair, I think they'll want to hire you, or they'll want to work with you because you're going to get stuff done. For the people that don't walk away with something like they don't feel good about it, does that concern you at all?
You mean from our personal interactions or from.
Yeah, or maybe no matter how much we try to control the team or project experience, it doesn't always work out with everyone in a great way. Does that impact you with the people who walk away with, say, a negative experience? How do you deal with that if it does
Mm,
impact you?
I don't know. When you're coming from a place, like you said, of authenticity, your reaction to a lot of these things, I mean, it is who you are, right? So, without to say that I'm not at fault for anything, I wouldn't say that I've come across a situation where I said, "Oh, I really shouldn't have done that." Very very rarely. Once or twice, I would say, in my entire career. And I've called the person, let's say, to have a discussion and apologize and speak to why I did what I did at the time and whatnot. Some of it may have been immaturity, new to a role, new to a management role, or whatever it is. But when you actually reflect on why you're doing things and your considerations, I think at that point you live with your decisions. And again, I don't think you're ever going to please everyone. And so much of our lives are spent on our jobs and things like that. I mean, for me, it is very important that people have as positive an experience, as possible within my team. That I can guarantee you. But that doesn't mean that the work doesn't need to get done.
I have to say that for me, I only learned how to be a good project manager when I stopped worrying about what people thought about me personally. Because when you're worried about how that person took it, then you're trying to. Sometimes you got to send them on a mission that they don't want to do. You know what I mean? But if it's for the greater good of the project, for the greater good of the team, they'll have to eat it, and they'll thank you afterwards because, or maybe they won't, but it'll make a big impact positively on them later on.
Everyone likes to complete a project. Everyone likes to learn. You may not always learn through the most painless way, right? So you're not always doing tasks at work that are the ones you love to do the most or the most pleasant or whatnot, but they might be the ones that teach you the most. And you may recognize that in the long run, right?
Absolutely. And just to bring it to full circle, I mean, because we started on this thread of networking, and then it turned into reputation building and all of that. But I think we have to remind people too that, and it comes back to what you said, like you're building a reputation, you're building a legacy, and you never know when that will kick in. You never know which members of your network it's going to kick in until you actually see it. Do you have a recommendation for people in terms of building your network?
I mean, it's definitely depending on your industry, depending on your role. I think it is something you need to be actively conscious of. I don't know how many people have, professional organizations where things are kind of called by the organization, and you get to attend those, or alumni associations. Some people have some of those. But I think you need to, work on it actively. Call some personal, 5 cassettes or happy hours, I guess, with people you've worked with in the past or are working with now. It's something you're going to have to make an effort for. And depending on the workplace or the work environment, the work culture, some places only want to do these events after work. Some places will only attend these if they're over lunch or during work hours. You got to find what's right with your circle, with your that point in your career. But just make sure that you're reaching out to people and that you're meeting people from across your organization, across your industry. Go to some of those conferences, right? Volunteer for some of them. I think there's not one single recipe for these things, and I'm sure they vary a lot industry by industry. But you have to seek out those opportunities. And I know it's tough, right? I know it's tough to get away on a Wednesday evening in the middle of the week to go and do some of these things, but I think the payoff is huge in the long run. And you may only make one or two or three valuable acquaintances that evening, but then cultivate those, right? Reach out to people. One thing I've always done, and that I've always done organically and never with the intent of like keeping my network active, which is, the new term that I keep on hearing this year. But if I think of someone has told me they really enjoyed a trip to Portugal, for example. I don't know, we met one evening at a project management cocktail, Mark, and you told me you enjoyed your trip to Portugal. And I find myself in Portugal. I will write you a note and I will say, by the way, I'm in Portugal right now. You were right. It's amazing. And I do that very naturally with people all the time. And it kind of keeps the conversation going without much effort on my part, to be honest, because to me, that's not an effort. Like I'll remember that type of thing about someone. And I think people are very, surprised sometimes that, they won't have heard from me for a year or two, but I'll come back to them with something very specific that they've shared with me in the past, and I'll just mention how, it came to be in a recent conversation and how I thought of them. So that's one way I do it, because I can't go to as many events as I probably would need to meet up with all the people. But there's many ways of doing it. And I think what matters is just staying open, going to a few of these things, organizing some of them yourself. If you find yourself in a situation where there's not that many in your industry or in your company, and just meeting up with people. And sometimes some people are more intimidated by the larger groups. And maybe the best thing for you is organizing small lunches with one or two people in your company when you're there on a Tuesday, let's say. I think that works too. Just finding out what people are up to. Most people are very open, very happy to share, very happy to meet new colleagues.
Interesting. So it comes naturally to you. It's good because I've kind of struggled with it myself. I'm not a cocktail person, right? Even though I've been to cocktails and I've
Been
been
to many, yeah.
to galas and stuff like that, but oh man, the stuff that goes on the anxiety that goes on in my head before an event, the lead up to it. But once you're there, you also realize that that's interesting. You'll meet if you make an effort, you'll see that there's one or two things where like, oh, that's going to go in there, and then you'll pull it out eventually, and then like kind of like what you did. One personal experience I just had recently with you is sometimes I like to post about a book that I've read recently because I find that's helpful if it's shared. And then what was rewarding is you actually came back to me and you said, I'm reading the same book, the 100-Year Life, right? So which, by the way, I found super relevant at this moment in my life. But, that's another recommendation I would have for anyone who was looking for adding to their reading list. And then this is a good segue because the book itself talks about periods in your life because you're going to live longer. There will be times where you're going to have to retool or reskill in your career. Gone are the days where, for most of us, where you're going to have a stretch for 40 years where you're going to work like this job in this company, go straight up if you can, or stay, or you plateau and then you retire at 65 and then you have another 10 years. If you live 100 years, you're going to probably have to work longer. And then you're going to have moments where you transition a little bit. And then during that time, you're probably not earning as much as you could, but you're probably reskilling or learning. And I think that's something that you probably want to share a little bit about, right?
Yes, and this I think applies even more to the younger and mid-career professionals, if you will. Sometimes the life is like a hamster wheel, and you're in it and you're caught up in it, and you don't have much time to question, what's going on or what you should be doing next or whatnot. But at any point in your career, you definitely need to be either making this really, really good, substantial living for the role you're in, or you've taken a less paying role, but you're really learning a lot, right?
Mm.
You could not find yourself or let yourself stay too long in a situation where you're not getting paid what you feel your contributions are worth, and where you're not learning. You got to be doing one of the two, because the learning will pay off in the long run and will probably open many more doors for you the longer your career will be in the future. And getting paid now will pay off in helping with your retirement planning, or like an investment in a house or vacationing or whatever it is you like to focus your money. But you got to be doing one of the two, ideally both, right? Because as a professional, I mean, we're all human beings, and we're all, very worthy, right? But a corporation is paying you to accomplish certain things, right? Whatever those may be. And as a professional, your worth becomes the sum of all your skills and experiences, right? And the more either highly specialized those are, or the more flexible and versatile you are, either way, you have to be bringing value to the table that they'll want to pay you for, into retirement. You have to be building a certain skill set, and the more you do that throughout your career, I think the better off you will be, for sure, in the context of, a longer life expectancy, where, many of us are not so sure by the time we retire, is there going to be a government pension plan?
Mm.
What is going to be that solution by that point in time, right? Like, some of us are asking ourselves these questions even today, and we're not up against retirement yet. It could be in one industry, but doing many different things in that industry, or taking your skill set and transposing it into various different industries. All of that is possible. Taking some courses outside of work, like if you're in a period of your career where you've been doing the same job for 2 to 3 years, you're relatively comfortable in that role, you know what you're doing. So you have what I call a little bit of mental bandwidth left. Well, then taking that night class to improve, or taking some weekend AI workshop to see how it can be incorporated in your field in the future. Whatever it may be, you should always be taking advantage of those opportunities, to build on your current skill set.
How do you know when it's time to make a switch or to make a jump?
For me, it really has to do with learning. Like, I call it, and I'm sorry for the engineering term, I am who I am. If my learning starts becoming like an asymptote, if it's not on this straight path anymore and it's kind of hovering around the same line and starting to plateau, for me, then I'm saying to myself, well, what am I gaining from this? And at certain points in time, you may choose to stay in a role like that. Let me be clear. For example, let's say you have an ailing relative you have to take care of. Maybe not the best time to go and, rebrand yourself as the AI expert for proposals, if that's not who you are today. Maybe you want to focus on your personal life for a little while you're handling that relative or their estate, or whatever the case may be. Life throws you certain things in your path, and you have to handle those on top of your career. That's not necessarily the best time to move, regardless of whether or not you've reached a learning plateau, right? But if you feel like you're not getting that much out of it anymore, and financially they're paying you on par with the industry or a little bit above, so you think it'll be a little bit harder to find a similar or greater compensation, you'll have to make a bit more effort. Maybe you'll have to level up to the next level. But you got to be thinking, is this the best place for me to be spending my time? And that, to me, has always come back to a question of learning. But for different folks, it may be a question of salary. They may be saying, I heard this other guy or woman is making 20% more doing what I do at that place down the street. Okay, maybe that's your trigger point. For myself, it's always been the learning trigger point. That's how I've always gauged it.
That is good, because what I like about your gauge as opposed to the salary gauge is it's intrinsic as opposed to externally motivating. And what I find about the salary thing, and I am human, so I look at LinkedIn. I see some people with rocket pack trajectory, and they came from the same origins that I did at the same time. What happened? You know. But I realized too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you don't see. You just see the good stuff on LinkedIn. So like the chest puffing stuff. But that's where I really like that you said it's sometimes it's salary, but sometimes it's more of an internal need for you. You know, and when you satisfy the internal need, I think that leads to happiness. I think that leads to at least being satisfied or a little bit more than say because someone will always make more money than you. Always, someone will always
Always,
make more money than you.
always.
So that brings me to my next question, actually, with you is while you know you don't have to make all the money that you think you can make, what is the threshold that says, you know what, I'm okay with this? You know, like I'm okay with this.
I think you have to benchmark certain things in your industry slash professional level slash competency level to see if you're fully happy with what you're getting. And it's not always about a comparison, but there is a certain amount of what I call like an equity level. Is this company shortchanging me because they always pay 30% less than every other company in the field? Or is this other company always paying 50% more, and anywhere else I may go, I will not be making the same salary? Both of these things exist, by the way. Like I've talked to people that are stuck in positions because they tell me I am making a ridiculous amount of money for what I do, and I would rather switch and go to X company, but I know they don't pay that, and I just can't take that salary cut. I think if you're sober enough to know that not everyone is going to make, I don't know who's paying a lot these days. I guess they call them the FANG, or and actually I don't know if that's purely true anymore. But anyhow, let's say those salaries, whatever those represented in the last 10 years. Well, you know that there's a premium there, which probably comes with some other difficulties. Who knows? But if you look at, I don't know, let's say you work for transportation companies or you work for CN or Via Rail, well, you can benchmark across those 2, 3 companies with people you know, HR professionals who have looked into it, recruiting firms at those in that industry, and you can pretty much find what that level is within 10 to 20%, let's say, and you can decide for yourself: is this where I want to be? Is this equitable within my industry? I think that's how you pretty much do it. And networking really helps with that, because if enough people know you in the industry and they know how you are and what you're looking for this for, they know you're not shopping around for their salary. You just want to know, if you're fairly compensated on your end. And
Hmm.
despite the fact that the networking has always come very very naturally to me, what I've never been great at doing is really activating that network, for my own personal compensatory benefit, if you will, in the sense of, sending them out to go and get me the highest paid role for what I do. So despite that, I'll use it in different ways, in the sense that I want to be aware of what's going on around me and what's going on in the industry and in other industries. But I haven't been that great in activating it to my own, career movement, if you will.
That's oddly comforting that you're telling this. I feel a bit relieved just because I don't do it very well either.
Right. And some
Uh,
people do, like you mentioned earlier. I probably know a lot of the same people on LinkedIn that you do, that you're saying the rocket, right? The rocket path of the career. I mean, that's fine. But you make choices in life.
yeah,
So, and I think what's important is that every year you just learn from your past experiences and you try to do a little bit better.
it's interesting too because I thought you were one of those people.
I I am not. I can assure you. I can assure you that I am not. But,
uh,
if I figure out the secret sauce, Mark, I'll call you one day and I'll share.
Thank you, thank you. I won't hold my breath, but thank you. But Good, good. So I wanted to follow tradition on this podcast by asking you, like I ask all my guests, of the experiences when you tie them together that you've shared today, like what's the overarching advice or wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
For me, it's that, professional paths, they take many, many roads. No two are alike, I would say. What I always recommend is really that buildup of your skills, because I think that's what follows you through. Um, that's what follows you throughout your career and in your future. I would say, the solid network is important, for all those times that you actually do need to know something about your industry, or that you do need to activate someone in your network because you're all of a sudden in need of a new role. Another thing that's very important for me is your direct supervisor, your boss. Sometimes you're better off in a less interesting role, but with the right boss that will open as many doors for you as possible, pay for your MBA, pay for your trainings, speak highly of you, in the rooms where you're not, to actually further advance your career, than to be with a boss that not necessarily doesn't care about you specifically, or is just not that type of person, but you have this really fancy title nonetheless. But it will get you nowhere in that corporation because no one's advocating for you behind closed doors. So I would say some of that. And you're also your own primary advocate. You need to learn how to speak for yourself. You need to learn how to sell yourself as well. And it's not natural for everybody. I know some people that are really great at it, but I wouldn't say that it's natural for everybody. And the same thing goes for those networking events, Mark. Sometimes I have to go to them because I'm representing a company and it's an event that they sponsor and no one else can make it, and I live downtown, whatever. All of this has happened to me, right? So I go to the networking event, and I've noticed that it's very liberating for people when I say to someone, I approach someone or they approach me, and I say, these kind of events make me a little uncomfortable. I notice that I don't know anyone else here tonight.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that person shares that they're in the same boat, and they kind of become your wingman for the evening or your wingwoman for the evening, and you go together and meet other people. I think it's important to know that you know, we're more alike than we realize. A lot of people out there, and there's very few of us that are so naturally, social butterflies at all these events. So something to keep in mind, I would say.
Thank you very much. I'm very touched with what you said. I think a lot of us are in the same boat, and it's comforting that you shared this with us. So thank you.
No, thank you for your time.
Pardon me.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. One last thing that I ask all guests is if someone watches this episode and they are compelled by your story and the wisdom that you had to offer, how can they reach you if they want to know more?
The best way is through LinkedIn. Although, do keep in mind, I do get a lot of LinkedIn messages, so you may not hear from me immediately. But I would say the best way is through LinkedIn, and just mention through Mark's podcast. That way, that I'll know where they saw this.
Okay.
But that would be the best way.
What I usually do too is I put your LinkedIn URL into the description of YouTube and all of that places, so they'll have all these places to find you. So I'm glad that you're open to it as well. This has been a very wonderful experience for me, and I'm sure for the audience that's going to see this. There are a lot of tidbits in here and big bits that you've provided that I think people will take. Different people will take different parts of it. I know for me personally, I've kind of taken a little bit more of the networking part, the other part with the boss. Just finding the right champion that will speak for you. Even in times when you cannot speak for yourself. This is
Right.
this is something that I take to heart. So thank you very much, Stella. And for the rest of you, we'll see you after you watch this one. Watch the next one. Watch the one after that. Keep coming. And take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Mark.
Hey, thank you very much. If you made it this far to the end of the podcast, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We're just starting out, so it would help if I could just ask one more thing of you. please subscribe to this channel and share the podcast, share the episode on any platform you can. It would mean a lot to me and it would help us a lot. Thank you.